Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Show me your host, Preacher Moss. Let me apologize right up front to my mother, Mary Moss, because I forgot to send you the link, but I will send you a copy of the show. Forgive me. I'm fasting. I'm a little bit forgetful today. And on top of that, I also want to reach out to several people who've been reaching out to me about some of the things going on in society, some of the things going on with family relationships, business relationships, how we communicate with one another, in the scope of everything that's going on in terms of police brutality, racism, COVID, health issues, financial issues, and what actually hit me, if this makes any sense. I'm going to give a shout out, Sister Reed. Thank you for coming on, Sister Reed. What it actually boiled down to is this concept that I have. I've named the show "Smiling While Restoring Faith in a World of Phoniness." Again, that title is "Smiling While Restoring Faith in a World of Phoniness," which in many regards is prophetic tradition. That is being able to look at the brighter side of things and not take them. You have to take them personally sometimes, but not as personally or not as so personal as to have it define your character or your behavior. And I really, really wanted to touch on this subject because I felt like I've been amiss. I've been talking about a lot of things. This is whatever show number 54 on the ShOUT show. We've talked a lot of things, but I really haven't really drilled down on faith in the context of chaos that surrounds us. Faith in the aspect of, in some regards, losing faith. Faith in the aspect of maybe we're not as strong as we were before. And that happens sometimes when you go through things. So like an injury. I've said often, the span of an athlete's career is not how great you were, how long you played. It's really framed in terms of how well you were able to play with injury. And I realize that faith, in many regards, has to do, in some regards, with having a standard that you believe in, but working to that standard. And that space in between is sometimes being able to play with injury. As I looked at the scope of it, I wanted to be really, really clear. When I say really, really clear, what I mean is I want to be able to step back out of myself. Sometimes faith could be a very myopic thing. I always say that sometimes when people have these arguments with one another and we have these clashes of different religions, it comes from that particular place where people think that faith has to be superior over somebody else's faith. Meaning the aspect or the output of what you believe has to have for lack of a better word, it must have a superior position over the realities that you're facing. It's almost like business sometimes. When people are in business, they have faith in a situation or a scenario, like I have faith in my business, and they get into competition and say you win that market, but the market share that you win is not really that big, and the amount or the cost that you had to go and put into it, invest, it really doesn't match the return. And sometimes faith can be like that. But to keep it fun, I've decided to make faith a little bit different today. I decided to look at faith from a media point of view, and more importantly, from an entertainment point of view. Because I believe those points of view are some of the things that get us into trouble today. And I will actually share some things with you that probably got me into trouble today. As a comedian, as an African American, as a creative, probably got me into trouble. But I feel like, you know what? It's okay. I can share it. The Hollywood model of faith is something like what we're seeing now in our public domain, meaning that people attach faith to their ability, in their minds, the ability to have you believe that they're worthy of your faith. Meaning, a value assessment or value judgment is based upon, do you like this person? Not so much do you have faith in them. And faith, in many regards, is taking a backseat to popularity, meaning that people feel like if you don't believe in everything I'm saying, if you don't believe in everything I'm doing, the words Chris Tucker, the words that are coming out of my mouth, then you lack faith. And people say that in regards because they say you lack faith, but what they're saying is your intelligence is a little bit too much for me. Meaning the ability to ask a great question is one of the rudiments of faith. You can't believe everything you say. Look at the sophistication of a baby. Children, if you will. Children have some of the most adept metaphysical understanding of faith that you're ever going to see. A child with no language, no ability for adult movement, or they totally depend on adult presence. Yet a child has a value system to determine whether they have faith in you. A child cries. Well, you're not aware that a child is judging you? How fast? Who is the first one to show up when I'm hungry? Who's the first one to make sure I can eat? A lot of times it's the mother. That's why maybe the facts that babies are always closer to their mothers than their fathers. That's no big deal. But I'm saying, not only can a child develop that situation or develop that sensibility, they can immediately attach it to trust. Now, I'm going to give you some edicts here. And I also want to apologize because I think people talk about faith and they attach it to religious faith. There are people who have faith who are not part of an organized religion. However, their faith is tied to the fact that they see it as a pathway to do the right thing and the wrong thing, understand good and bad. You have to relate to that. Because we sometimes put that out, you're not attached to a religion, you're not a believer, it doesn't mean that you're not faithful, it means they don't have faith in the same things that you believe. Even in our own religion, we talk about being people of faith, but we'd be ridiculous not to say that some of the greatest ideas in organized religion are based upon the fact that people have lost faith and had to regain faith. Nobody's just like that. Everyone is tested. So it's going to go up and it's going to go down. But I think the idea of faith is really interesting because today it's so attached to the behavior, it's attached to money, and it's attached to position. Allow me to demonstrate. In Hollywood, the scope of faith is to the point whereby when it's not properly, let's say properly founded or properly grounded in Hollywood, the idea of faith moves to hope. Meaning that my faith is not strong, but I have hope. Now we've talked about the idea of trust in Arabic, tawakkul, but the idea of faith, deen, and now we're talking about hope. Some of us operate on this modality of hope, understanding that we have to really step up to faith. In Hollywood, it's really interesting because they tell everyone to come to Hollywood. And what it is the land of dreams, a city of angels. There's always this idolatry and this angelic understanding of Hollywood, if you will. But what is interesting is that when you get there, there's nothing angelic about it. You are there with a lot of people who have the same aspirations, the same drives, not so much the same morals, not so much the same character, but everybody has a goal, and that goal is to be successful. And sometimes you'll be an outlier because your goals are not to be successful. Maybe your goals are to help people. Maybe your goals are to educate. Maybe your goals are to lift people up in terms of their mentality and what they're thinking. When I went to Hollywood, I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be a stand-up comedian. I was a stand-up comedian. I was my own. Your boy held it down. I can still hold it down at 53. But my point was, when I went to Hollywood, there was another part of me that had to be balanced against this whole thing of hope, if you will. And that part allowed me to be a school teacher. Meaning that while I had these dreams and goals, there was something that I did, which was teach in the public school system of Long Beach Unified School District. And I often reflect and understand, that I underestimated what that drive was. Because while I had dreams and aspirations, I had, and not through any of my own design, people. When I look back, I realized that I taught public school because I realized that my faith was really tied into helping other people expand on their faith. These people were students. They were children who were deemed or classified as severely most disturbed children which is a very, very tough designation in public schools. All of us know about the jokes about the yellow bus and things like that. And it was funny because I realized once I got out of teaching and got really deeply into the business of Hollywood and managers and things like that, that it was a soulless place. When I say soulless, I'm not talking about individuals. I'm talking about the idea or the formation of fame and fortune. It's a soulless pursuit in many regards. Like you got to change. Something has to change. You have to give up something to get something. Sometimes you give up a lot to get a little. I'm not going to go too much into that, but I thought it was interesting that the antithesis is that in Hollywood, they have you believe that you'll be successful if you have faith in that system. If you have faith in that system. These days in the United States, what are we talking about? Faith in systems, faith in the police, faith in the government. In Hollywood, is faith in that system, which is a system that if you do what we tell you to do, if you churn out the material and the content that we want you to turn out, then we'll eventually take care of you. I didn't stay around long enough to figure out whether that was true or not. But I took a leap of faith based on the fact that I understood where I was a soulless place. I took a leap of faith and I left Hollywood after coming off the George Lopez show. And it was shortly after 9/11. Let's call it what it is. And I had gone back and forth about whether I wanted to do this project, Allah Made Me Funny, because I was comfortable in my faith stance with African American Muslims. But I was not comfortable if I wanted to expand that and explore my relationship with quote unquote my brothers and sisters, immigrant Muslims, which is a horrible term, but that's what they use. And it was interesting that I went back and forth, and it was a faith leader who led me to the point. He said, if you have faith in this faith, then you have to help expand and recreate, particularly at this time, not recreate, but help expand and rediscover, if you will, faith in people who had lost faith, who happened to be in the Islamic faith. I was shook, and I realized over the years that while I've done a lot of good things, I've made a lot of enemies, and not so much in the Muslim community. Some of the Muslim entertainers, but I realized that I have faith in the community in a way that was a little bit different. I realized that my biggest problem with Hollywood, going back to that, and even when I had relationships with them and I was doing all that made me funny, I realized the beef was, if you will, that people did not like the fact that I had a certain understanding and value of Muslims. And I had to smile in that world of phoniness. Because sometimes that phoniness can be in Hollywood, but be very clear, it can be in our own communities, if you will. I'm a firm believer, and I'm like Spike Lee in a way. I believe that, Muslims should make Muslim product and get it out there, but here's a caveat. Keep the Muslim dollars in the Muslim community. That was my only mistake for a lot of people. I could do everything, Allah made me funny, but those dollars, they wanted to go to Hollywood. I wanted to stay in the Muslim community. I wanted us to build. So much respect to people like Omar Regan and Musa and the old crew of Allah made me funny. We wanted that Muslim dollar to stay in the Muslim community, and that was a faith thing. It would be later, after I started Allah Made Me Funny, some of you heard me mention this story, and I'm going to bring him up. One of my mentors, his name is Harry Weber. Harry Weber, for those who may not have heard that episode, Harry Weber was the first artistic director of Motown. So he was one of the first black ad guys down on Madison Avenue in New York. His jingles are iconic. I'm stuck on Band-Aids because Band-Aids stuck on me. My baloney has a first name. At Ford Quality's Job 1, 7-Up the Young Cola. He named Michael Jackson the king of pop. I mean, this is, iconic guy. And I went to go see him and ask him about the Muslim brand. And he asked me, what was I trying to do? And I said, I'm trying to do that. He said, so basically you believe X, Y, and Z about the power of the Muslim dollar. He said, yeah. He said the power of the Muslim dollar is not going to be powerful unless you give it to these people. And I said, we disagreed. And he said, let me explain to you about faith. So, of course, I stood up because I'm sitting up in my chair because I'm like, I call him the Oracle, Harry Weber, God bless him. I call him the Oracle. So I said, can you tell me about faith? And he broke this down. He took me on a trip to Malibu. I met him in LA. We took a trip to Malibu, which is maybe about 45 minutes to an hour north of LA. I mean, I don't even know, but it's outside of LA. But he brought me out there, and I want all of you people who are listening to this, watching this podcast, to remember this. He took me to the house. Well, he wasn't living there, but it was his former house of Flip Wilson. And Flip Wilson, for those you don't know, was a comedian, very funny. He had the Flip Wilson show. What was really, really important about Flip Wilson was that, not that he had one of the first black TV shows on, but he owned it. He owned it. And what Mr. Weber told me about Flip Wilson was that Flip Wilson underwent a whole lot of oppression, bad feelings, attacks, because people didn't believe in his idea that I can develop a content and I can have people on my show that reflect my idea and my identities, and we can keep that money in our community. For those of you who don't know, Flip Wilson owned every episode of the Flip Wilson show. That's unheard of. He owned his masters. He was one of the few to ever do it in television. Big props, Flip Wilson. He said, but let me tell you the other part of it, which is really intriguing as we talk about smiling while restoring faith in a world full of phoniness. This will be the rub, people. While you are restoring faith, you may have lost faith, there are people who actively engage to make sure you stay in a stagnant position. If you rebuild, you don't rebuild too well. If you rebuild, you don't rebuild better. If you lost, they want you to stay lost a little bit longer. And if you have no faith, then they're happy to make sure that happens. This is what's going on in the United States today. There's two classes of people. And you can apply this to faith, and I will. There's two classes of people that are out there today. They're buyers and they're sellers. The same as in Hollywood. They're buyers and they're sellers. Mr. Weber took me out to Malibu, and he said, Preacher Moss, he said, what are you seeing? I see all these houses. He said, yes, you can't come up here to Malibu if you don't know people. Like, you just can't show up. You just can't come here and say, hey, I'm looking for, the opportunities are not like that. He said, this is a very, very established piece of real estate. And I asked him what he meant. He said, here, where we are in Malibu, he said, this is the land of buyers. And I said, what do you mean? He said, these are the people that make decisions. He said, when you go into Hollywood, the people that live in Hollywood, those are sellers. They're not buyers. And I said, whoa, what do you mean? He said, the problem with life, particularly the problem with faith these days, is you have a lot of people that sell you faith. They sell you faith, but they themselves have not bought faith. Meaning that they're telling you something, but they haven't fully bought in. It's easier to sell you on it than me take that idea of faith and put it myself and live that tradition. And I look at it today, even with all the protests, even with all the politics and things of that nature, and I realize we are a nation that's divided by buyers and sellers, which is very amazing because we call them politicians, we call them policemen, we call them doctors, we call them imams, we call them reverends and chaplains and nuns and teachers. But could it be that we are a world diametrically opposed to having buyers and sellers? And here's a hint. All the buyers are not rich people. They're not rich people. All the sellers are not poor people. It's the idea that people buy ideas, not the monetary things. We have a faith tradition that speaks to buyers. literal buyers, and everyone else becomes the people that buy from them, if you will. So, as I begin to break this down, I want to congeal a couple of ideas. The idea of faith today has broken down lines between buyers and sellers. You heard me say buyers and sellers. You didn't hear me say educators. We didn't say advocates. There are the people who believe and have that integrity that's undisputable. And then there are the people who don't believe. And in that space of not really believing, they try to sell you something. It becomes a value proposition. You know, I often reflect on different aspects of my career as a teacher, as a comedian, as a writer, even as a friend, family member. And I realize sometimes in that conversation, it does take on the tonality of buyer seller tonality. And I'm like, I have to check myself before I wreck myself. But I think as we look at society today, there are people who are sellers masquerading as buyers. They don't know the nomenclature. One of the saddest things that could ever happen to you is somebody trying to sell you something and they don't know what they're selling. It could be religion. It could be politics. It could be race. It could be all these things. But I'm saying, what's your protocol for breaking down someone who has introduced themselves or advertised themselves as a buyer when they're really a seller? I'm not saying that they're false. And sometimes the scary part is they don't know when they're doing that either. They don't know. But for the purity and the imperative, if you will, of rebuilding faith, I think we need to have that conversation about who's a buyer, who's a seller. Religious wise, I look at some of the greatest buyers in the world who coincidentally they weren't sellers. What they was able to put out there is the fact that they bought into this thing so deeply that other people invested in, and there was no selling. All of our great prophets, you name them all, Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, Jesus, Moses, all of them were great buyers. The people that followed them, they didn't have to be sold. Those people invested. It's a difference between a seller, meaning you have to give me something, and someone who invests. And maybe these days we need to get back into faith as an investment to help this world, the world for ourselves, the world for our children, the world for tomorrow, the world for yesterday, be a little bit more compassionate and a little bit more functional. So, hey, it's all right to be a buyer as long as you understand what that means. It's not all right to be a seller, a seller if you think you're a buyer because you could do damage. The true buyers don't sell you anything. Faith, as they say, is not supposed to be compulsory. And that's true. I would never have become a Muslim if I had to pay dues, if I had to sign up, if I had to take a subscription for the Quran, a subscription for the Hadith. If I had to rent a Bible, if I had to lease a Torah, it would have never happened. And those traditions are very, very interesting because they take us to where we are right now. The confusion is that people keep us confused. The confusion is, like I said, you have a group of people masquerading as buyers, they're really sellers. The truth is, we need, at some point in time, to stop with the foolishness, to stop masquerading around and call people out if they're not what they are. And if not, just move away from them, separate from them, get back to that part. Because I said smiling while rebuilding, and there's a reason why I said smiling while rebuilding. Because the faith rebuilding process may not be about you. It may be you're being used to build other people's faith, to let them know that whatever's going on with that brother, he still has a smile on his face. And maybe I should be grateful. Maybe that's the type of person, the type of situation I want to be adapted with. I want to be recognized with. And begin to move away from the stuff that we're seeing today. This is Donald Trump. He's a great businessman. He's a seller. He's never been a buyer. And some of the people, and it's not to knock on him, I look at politicians. Politicians are great sellers. They're not buyers. So in your individual lives, in your family lives, in your social lives, in your community life, maybe today you take a piece of paper, right? Take a piece of paper and you put a line down the middle of it and you mark on one side buyers and you mark on the other side sellers. And at the top you put faith. Faith. Thank you guys so much. Have a great day. Remember, faith, not to be sold, it's to be invested in.